ready to dive into something kind of spicy.
Oh, I think I know where this is going.
We're talking sexting today
Interesting.
and how it all ties into, well, feeling good about yourself.
Makes sense. I mean, it is pretty personal.
Right. So we're going deep on this podcast script.
Right.
All about sexting and self-esteem. I mean, sexting's everywhere, right?
Yeah, it's basically part of the whole digital dating scene.
But is it actually, like, good for your self-esteem?
That's the big question, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it can go either way.
Okay, so the script brings in a psychologist.
Okay.
And get this, they say sexting can actually be empowering.
Really? How so?
Apparently, when it's, consensual.
Right, I have that.
And in a healthy relationship, it can make you feel desired.
Feeling desired, that's a good feeling. Validated, too.
Exactly. And the script talks about how positive feedback.
Oh, you mean like compliments and stuff?
Yeah, especially about your body.
Yeah.
It can really boost your confidence.
Makes sense. Like, it's one thing to, feel good about yourself.
Right.
But when someone else is affirming that, it's like powerful.
Totally. So it's not all bad.
No, definitely not. But the experts in the script, they warn about the downsides too.
Like what?
Well, when sexting gets pressured.
Uh-oh.
Or like unrealistic body standards get involved.
Yeah, I can see how that would happen. It's like everything else you start comparing.
Exactly. And the script even gives this example. Someone feels pressured to sext.
I hate that feeling.
Right. Just to keep your partner happy.
Oh, that's awful.
And that kind of pressure, well, it can lead to anxiety,
Yeah.
body dissatisfaction,
Yeah.
especially if you start like tying your worth to how you look in a sex.
That's so unhealthy. And then there's social media.
Oh, don't even get me started.
Of all those perfect bodies, it's hard not to compare.
It's impossible. And it's like social media has seeped into our most intimate moments.
So true.
We're bombarded with these like idealized images.
Right.
And they create these totally impossible expectations, not just for how we look, but how we think we should be acting in our relationships too.
Wow. So much to unpack here. It's like sexting can be amazing or awful
Totally depends on the person.
in the situation.
Exactly. It all comes down to communication, setting boundaries.
And having a healthy sense of self.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
So how do you actually do that? How do you, navigate this whole sexting thing without, losing yourself?
The script gets into that.
Really?
Yeah, there are all these practical tips for approaching sexting in a way that makes you feel good.
Okay, tell me more.
Well, first, we got to acknowledge something. The fear of rejection.
Yeah.
It plays a huge role in all of this. Putting yourself out there,
Yeah.
especially in such a vulnerable way, it's scary.
Totally agree.
And if you already have, some body image worries, or you rely too much on what other people think,
Right.
that fear of rejection, it can just be crippling.
Okay, so how do we deal with that? Because sexting, it can be fun
Right.
and intimate.
Exactly. It's about finding that balance. And the psychologist in the script actually offers 5 tips for doing just that.
Okay, I'm ready. Hit me with them.
All right, number 1, boundaries.
Boundaries, yeah, those are important.
Talk openly with your partner about what you're comfortable with.
Yeah.
And remember, it's always okay to say no.
No guilt trips allowed.
Exactly. Tip number 2, focus on the emotional connection.
Oh, that's important.
Sexting should be about more than just the physical stuff.
Right.
It's about building intimacy and feeling valued for more than just your looks.
So it's like, yes, I find you attractive,
Yeah,
but I also love your sense of humor, the way you make me feel.
exactly. That deeper connection, it makes all the difference.
Okay, that makes sense. What's number 3?
Number 3, avoid comparisons.
Easier said than done.
Right.
All right.
But this is where understanding a bit about social comparison theory can help.
Social comparison theory, what's that?
Basically, humans are hardwired to compare themselves to others.
Oh, I do that all the time.
We all do. But when it comes to body image,
Yeah.
those comparisons can be super damaging.
Okay, I see that. What else?
Tip number 4, positive language.
You mean like compliments?
Yes, but focus on compliments that go beyond looks.
Oh, I like that.
Celebrate each other's personalities too.
Right.
It helps keep the focus on that emotional connection.
So instead of just, you have a great butt,
Right.
you could say, you're so funny, or I love your intelligence.
Exactly. Makes it more meaningful.
Right. I love it. Okay, we've got boundaries, emotional connection, avoiding comparisons, positive language. What's the last one?
Number 5, knowing when to step away.
Okay.
If you start feeling, drained, insecure, it's a sign to take a break, reassess,
Yeah.
trust your gut, and put your well-being first.
That's such great advice. It's easy to get caught up in the moment.
It is. And sometimes you
Yeah.
don't realize how something is affecting you until later.
Exactly. The script actually goes on to share some real life stories from people who have experienced, the good and the bad sides of sexting.
Oh, interesting. What kind of stories?
Well, one person talks about how, at first, sexting made them feel sexy, confident,
Yeah,
like they enjoyed the attention, the feeling of being desired.
right.
But over time, it started to feel more like a performance.
Oh,
Like
no.
they got caught up in trying to be perfect,
Yeah.
and that led to some insecurities.
That makes total sense. It's
Yeah.
like that pressure to perform, it can really get to you.
Exactly. And it highlights how important communication is. If you're feeling pressured or uncomfortable,
You got to speak up.
totally. So even
Yeah.
if you start out feeling confident, things can change. It's about checking in with yourself, making sure your needs are being met.
So true. Now, the other person's experience, it was kind of different.
Oh.
They shared how they started feeling objectified through sexting, like their worth was being reduced to their physical appearance.
Oof. I bet that was hard.
It was. And, it's a classic example of how sexting can cross that line from feeling empowering to feeling kind of exploitative.
Yeah, for sure.
Like you deserve to feel valued and respected for the whole package, not just your body.
It's about setting clear boundaries, being assertive about what you're comfortable with.
Exactly. And you should never feel obligated to do anything that makes you feel, well, not good, even in a romantic relationship.
Couldn't agree more. It seems like communication is just like the key to all of this.
Without a doubt, open and honest communication, it's essential for creating a safe and enjoyable experience. It's about respecting each other's boundaries, needs, and feelings.
Absolutely. And remember, it's perfectly okay to change your mind. What you're comfortable with one day might not feel right the next.
So true. And that's totally valid.
This has been super insightful. I'm actually curious. What are your personal values and boundaries around sexting?
Oh, wow. Putting me on the spot. Well, it's such a personal thing. What feels empowering and fun for one person might feel totally different for someone else.
Totally. There's no right or wrong answer. It's about figuring out what aligns with your values and comfort levels.
Exactly. And those can evolve over time, too, as you know. You gain more experience, learn more about yourself and what you want in a relationship.
Right. It's not like you have to have it all figured out right away. It's a journey.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And I think being open to that exploration and how things change, that's key to having a healthy and fulfilling experience.
Yeah.
With sexting or any kind of intimacy, really.
Couldn't agree more. So if you're listening to us and you're like, whoa, I've never actually thought about my own values and boundaries around sexting,
Yeah.
where do you even start?
Good question.
Hmm.
I think a good starting point is asking yourself some questions. What feels good to you? What makes you feel confident, empowered? What are your hard limits, the things you're absolutely not okay with?
Those are good ones.
And, it might also be helpful to think back on past experiences with sexting.
Yeah.
What felt good, what didn't? What did you learn from those experiences?
Those are great questions to consider. Taking that time for self-reflection can make all the difference.
For sure.
And you mentioned earlier, communication is key in all of this.
Absolutely. Don't be afraid to have those conversations with your partner, too. Open, honest communication. So important in any relationship, but especially when it comes to something as intimate as sexting.
Yeah.
Talk about your expectations, your fears, your desires. The more you can communicate openly and honestly, the more likely you are to have a positive and fulfilling experience.
Absolutely. It's about creating that safe space where you both feel comfortable expressing your needs and boundaries. And it sounds like being willing to have those conversations, even if they're kind of awkward.
Exactly. And remember, it's perfectly okay to change your mind too. Just because you're comfortable with something in the past doesn't mean you have to be comfortable with it now. Your feelings and boundaries are valid no matter what.
That's such an important reminder. We're always growing and arriving, and our boundaries should be allowed to evolve with us.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So as you continue to explore the world of sexting, keep those values and boundaries top of mind. And remember, the most important thing is to prioritize your own well-being and make choices that feel good for you.
Well said. This has been such an enlightening conversation. I feel like we've covered so much.
Me too.
From the potential benefits of sexting to the importance of boundaries, self-respect, communication.
It's been a pleasure.
I agree. And listeners, we hope this has given you some food for thought, inspired you to think about your own values and boundaries around sexting.
Yeah.
Remember, there's no right or wrong answer here. It's all about what feels right for you. And as always, prioritize your own well-being and never hesitate to seek support if you need it.
Good advice.
We'll continue exploring this topic in our next segment, diving deeper into those real-life examples and how to navigate those tricky comparisons.
Sounds good.
It's so easy to get caught up in comparing ourselves to others, especially when it comes to like body image.
Oh, totally. Especially with social media these days. It's like everyone's presenting this perfect version of themselves.
Exactly. And when we start comparing our real selves to those like airbrushed images, it can really mess with our self-esteem.
Absolutely. It's so important to remember that what we see online, it's not always real.
Right. And that's why it's so crucial to like build that self-worth from within, not rely on getting validation from other people.
Couldn't agree more. It's about loving and accepting yourself for who you are, not for who you think you should be.
You mentioned earlier that the script includes some real life examples
Oh, yeah.
of people who have experienced like both the good and bad sides of sexting.
Right.
What kind of insights did they share?
Well, one person described how sexting initially made them feel really sexy and confident.
Like they enjoyed the attention.
Exactly, and the feeling of being desired by their partner. But then over time, it started to feel more like a performance.
Ah, I see what you mean. It's like they got caught up in trying to live up to this impossible ideal.
Yeah, and that ultimately led to some insecurities.
Makes total sense. It's easy to fall into that trap of feeling like you constantly have to perform.
Right, it's like you're always on stage, even in your most intimate moments.
So how do you break free from that pressure to be perfect?
Well, their story really highlights the importance of communication.
Oh.
Like if you're feeling pressured or uncomfortable, it's so important to speak up and have an honest conversation with your partner.
That's a good point. It's like even if you start out feeling confident, things can shift over time. It's all about checking in with yourself and making sure your needs are being met.
Exactly. Now, the other person's experience was quite different. They shared that they started to feel objectified through sexting.
Oh, wow, that's tough. Like their worth was being reduced to their physical appearance.
Right, and I imagine that can be a really damaging experience, especially if you're already struggling with body and
It's like you're being valued for your body and nothing else.
and that can really chip away at your self-esteem. It's crucial to remember that you deserve to feel valued and respected for who you are as a whole person.
This really highlights the importance of feeling seen for more than just your physical attributes. Like sexting should add to your sense of worth, not make you question it.
Totally agree. It's about setting those boundaries and being assertive about what you're comfortable with.
So it's not about saying no to sexting altogether.
Not necessarily. It's about doing it in a way that feels good for you and that respects your values.
Communication seems to be key in all of this.
Definitely open and honest communication with your partner is essential. It's about creating a safe and enjoyable experience for both of you.
That makes sense. So it's not just about what you're comfortable sharing.
Right. It's also about being respectful of your partner's boundaries and needs.
So it's like a two-way street.
Exactly. And remember, it's perfectly okay to change your mind. What you were comfortable with yesterday might not feel right today, and that's totally valid.
That's such an important reminder. We're all constantly evolving, and our comfort levels with sexting might change as we explore different relationships and discover more about ourselves.
Absolutely. It's all part of the journey.
We've talked about the potential ups and downs of sexting, the importance of boundaries and self-respect, and the fact that self-esteem ultimately comes from within.
Right.
But I'm curious, what are your personal values and boundaries around sexting?
That's a great question, and one that I encourage everyone to reflect on.
It's so personal, right?
Absolutely. What feels empowering and enjoyable for one person might feel completely different for someone else.
Totally. There's no right or wrong answer here. It's about figuring out what aligns with your own values and comfort levels.
Exactly. And those might evolve over time, too, as you gain more experience and learn more about yourself and what you want in a relationship.
That's a good point. It's not like you have to have everything figured out from the start.
It's an ongoing process of discovery.
So if you're listening to this and you're thinking, wow, I've never really thought about my own values and boundaries around sexting, where do you even begin?
Well, I think a good starting point is to ask yourself some questions. What feels good to you? What makes you feel confident and empowered? What are your hard limits? Those things you're absolutely not comfortable with.
That's a good place to start. And what about past experiences?
It can be helpful to reflect on those too. What felt good, what felt not so good.
Hmm.
What did you learn from those experiences?
Those are great questions to consider.
Yeah, and remember, communication is key. Don't be afraid to have those conversations with your partner.
Like really open up.
Exactly. The more you can communicate openly and honestly with each other, the more likely you are to have a positive and fulfilling experience.
And it's about creating that safe space, right, where you both feel comfortable sharing.
Exactly. And don't be afraid to be a little vulnerable.
Yeah, sometimes those tough conversations are the most important ones.
And remember, it's perfectly okay to change your mind too. Just because you were comfortable with something in the past doesn't mean you have to be comfortable with it. Now your feelings and boundaries are valid no matter what.
That's such an important reminder. We're always growing and evolving, and our boundaries should be allowed to evolve with us.
Absolutely.
So, as we wrap up this part of our conversation,
Yeah.
what's the one thing you want our listeners to take away from this discussion?
I think the most important thing is to prioritize your own well-being and make choices that feel good for you.
Well said. Okay, so we've talked a lot about the importance of self-esteem when it comes to sexting.
Yeah, it's not just about the pictures or the messages, it's about how you feel about yourself.
Exactly. And you mentioned earlier that self-esteem, it has to come from within.
It does. It's so easy to get caught up in seeking validation from others.
Especially in a world that's so focused on looks.
Exactly. It's like everywhere you turn, there's another message about how you should look.
And that can make it even harder to feel good about yourself, just as you are.
Absolutely. That's why it's so important to cultivate self-love and acceptance.
Okay, but how do you actually do that? It's easy to say love yourself, but it can be a lot harder to actually put it into practice.
You're right. It takes effort. And I think a good starting point is to be more aware of your self-talk.
Self-talk.
Yeah, like what are you saying to yourself about your body, your worth?
Oh, I get it. Are those thoughts kind? Or are they, super critical?
Exactly. Are you your own best friend? Or are you your own worst critic?
That's a good way to put it. So if someone's listening and they're realizing, wow, I'm really mean to myself, what can they do?
Well, one thing that can help is to practice gratitude.
Gratitude.
Yeah, like instead of focusing on what you don't like about yourself, try focusing on what you do like.
I see. So it's like shifting your focus from the negative to the positive.
Exactly. Maybe you appreciate your sense of humor or your creativity or your kindness.
And that can help boost your self-esteem.
It can. It's about recognizing your strengths and appreciating all the amazing things about you.
That's awesome. What else can people do?
Well, another thing that's super helpful is to surround yourself with positive people.
People who lift you up make you feel good about yourself.
Exactly. The people we spend time with can have a huge impact on how we see ourselves.
That's so true. And it's okay to ask for help if you're struggling.
Absolutely. If you're dealing with body image issues or low self-esteem, a therapist can be a great resource.
It's not a sign of weakness to reach out for support.
Not at all. It actually takes a lot of courage to ask for help. And remember, building self-esteem takes time. It's a journey, not a destination.
You're right. It's a process of learning to love and accept yourself, flaws and all.
And that's a beautiful thing. Embracing your imperfections and celebrating your unique qualities. You are worthy of love and respect, just as you are.
That's a powerful message. So as we wrap up this deep dive into sexting and self-esteem, what's the one thing you want our listeners to remember?
Remember that your worth comes from within. It doesn't depend on external validation or how you look in a sext or anything else. You are valuable and deserving, just as you are.
Love that. Sexting can be a fun and intimate way to connect with a partner, but it's so important to approach it from a place of self-love and respect.
I couldn't agree more.
Well, listeners, we've reached the end of our deep dive. We hope this conversation has been insightful, maybe even a little empowering. Remember to communicate openly with your partner, set those healthy boundaries, and always prioritize your own well-being. And never forget, true self-esteem comes from within. Until next time, stay curious and keep diving deep.